Welcome back to News Now on CNBC-TV18. Now, reeling under the Supreme Court's AGR blow, Bharti Airtel's chairman Sunil Mittal walked the corridors of power once again. He met officials at the Finance Ministry and yesterday he met Telecom Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad. Speaking after the meeting, Mittal promised to comply with the Supreme Court's order and said payments will be made before the next hearing on the 17th of March. Earlier, CNBC-TV18 had reported that the Telecom department is likely to issue fresh notices to telcos. So far, companies have only made part payments and are contesting the government's claims of overall dues. Mittal termed the current situation unprecedented and asked the government to rationalize taxes.
What are you suggesting to the government in terms of relief to the sector?
Because clearly there's you all know that the AGR has been an unprecedented crisis for the industry,
right,
and that is being dealt with by the government. I came to make certain suggestions for the overall health of the industry.
So could you elaborate on those?
I mean, the industry, as you know, is heavily taxed. That taxes needs to be looked at. The industry has very, very low revenues left in the kitty.
Right.
That needs to be addressed. And more importantly, this AGR hit which has come, that also needs to be dealt with.
So, TRA had made recommendations for lower levies for the sector. Did that come up for discussion in terms of specifics of how much should it be reduced from 8% to what?
The minister, you have to just give an overall, feeling of the industry. So, rationalization, reduction of taxes, levies. This has been a demand for a long time, and the regulator has been supporting it.
And so did you reiterate your demand for offsetting input tax credit and GST as well?
So in government's assessment,
today, how much more are you going to pay?
You keep on asking this question.
So government's assessment is that you owe 35,000 crore. How far are they off the mark as far as Bharti Airtel is concerned?
I am not sitting on those calculations because somebody is. So we will know in a few days.
Telecom companies continue to engage with the government today. Sunil Mittal of Bharti Airtel met Telecom's Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad. He said that AGR dues is an unprecedented crisis for the telecom sector. He also said on the sidelines that Bharti Airtel intends to make balance payment before March 17. Now, sources in the government say that over 15,000 crore under AGR dues have been received by the Department of Telecom, and it expects more balance payment by telecom companies in the next 7 to 10 days. Remember, Vodafone Idea has AGR dues of over 56,000 crore rupees, and so far it has made payment of 3,500, of which 1,000 crore rupees was paid for AGR dues just today. Bharti Airtel has AGR dues of over 39,000 crore rupees, of which 10,000 crore rupees has been paid by the company. Meanwhile, Tata Tele has AGR dues of over 14,000 crore, of which 2,197 crore rupees has been paid by the company. Now, sources also tell CNBC-TV18 that DOT is going to verify the self-assessment made by the companies and the dues given by the telecom department by doing a test check with the telecom companies. Also remember, Telecom department has sought legal opinion with regards to bank guarantee encashment from the Law Ministry. We also understand from sources that bank guarantee of the companies are being calculated circle-wise. So as of now, the government intends to comply with the Supreme Court's order and also ensure that telecom companies are in good financial health, as well as the interest of the customer is taken care of. Back to you.
All right, that was about the meeting that happened yesterday between the Telecom Minister and Sunil Mittal. But the government has proposed to constitute an interministerial group for LIC's Dalal Street debut. Sources say that the panel will be chaired by DPAM Secretary and the Financial Service Secretary. It will also have representation from Corporate Affairs Ministry and the Law Ministry. Moving on, the Reserve Bank of India has released the minutes of the Monetary Policy Committee's February meeting, where the MPC had unanimously decided to keep the repo rate unchanged. Lata Venkatesh joins us with more on the minutes. Lata, what's the rationale given by the MPC members for their rate decision?
Okay, well, normally we should give more importance to what the governor thinks, so I'm only paraphrasing what he has said. basically, the governor, echoing almost everybody else, says economic activity is down in the dumps. It has slowed since December, and the virus outbreak is only likely to make it worse. Remember, he's saying it in February. He still doesn't know, in the first week of February, he doesn't know the entire grimness of what will happen. He also says that the union budget has been largely prudent, so there is no expectation of inflation because of the fiscal policy being too loose. But he says the economy does need a stimulus. However, inflation is running at 7.4. That was the only number available to him. It was the December number. And you want to see how food inflation will behave. Also, core inflation is slightly higher. That is also an uncertainty. Therefore, it's prudent to wait. But he makes one very important point. He says financial stability also requires growth to revive. Now, that is very important. This is an unusual point that the governor makes, that, you normally think that because of high inflation, an economy becomes unstable. He says when there is very, very low growth also, banks can collapse, NBFCs can collapse. So that's a very important point he's making. Shows that he is convinced that we have to revive growth somehow. And that may explain also why they took some non-policy steps. The monetary policy was status quo and the stance was accommodative, but they took a lot of steps like the long-term repo and also changing the 14-day repo so as to allow yields to fall and therefore interest rates to fall. Now, the other members have said more or less the same thing, so I'm not paraphrasing everyone's statement except that of Chetan Ghate, who is an external member. He also is agreeing that growth needs help, but at the moment, since inflation is rising, let us wait and watch. But he also makes another important point, which no one else has made. He says there are too many people challenging inflation targeting and the monetary policy framework. There are many who want us to change the target from 4% plus or minus 2% to a target of 4 to 6%. He thinks that is not called inflation, stable inflation. So he seems to be, foreseeing this internal review of the monetary policy framework, and he is opposed to the idea of inflation targeting being challenged. These were the two things I found standing out. We must remember that these minutes were written on February 6th. After that, we have had another inflation number, which has been even higher than expected. So we must remember that we have to take on board the fact that inflation fears have only increased after these minutes were written.
Right, Lata, thanks for taking us through those details. Let's move on and talk about the big upcoming event next week. US President Donald Trump will spend 36 hours in India between the 24th and 25th of February. He's scheduled to visit 3 cities, Ahmedabad, Agra and Delhi. In Ahmedabad, the US President will hold a road show with Prime Minister Modi. The two leaders will also address a gathering in the city at the newly built Motera Stadium. It's the world's largest cricket stadium and is expected to house over 1 lakh people who will attend the Namaste Trump event. From Ahmedabad, the US President will head to the Taj Mahal in Agra with the First Lady Melania Trump. On the 25th of February, he will be in Delhi, where India and the USA will hold discussions on trade, defense, counter-terrorism and energy. And with that, it's a wrap on news now on CNBC-TV18. Thanks for watching.
The Reserve Bank governor has recently said that the monetary policy framework, the way in which interest rates are set, is up for review. There is an internal review by the Reserve Bank. A word of background, it was in 2016 that the government and Reserve Bank entered into an agreement, and the RBI said that it will keep inflation at 4% plus or minus 2%. It became formally an inflation targeting, a flexible inflation targeting central bank. Again in 2016, a monetary policy committee of 3 external members was set up with 3 members from the Reserve Bank. The membership of the external members ends in September 2020, and the agreement itself is up for review in March 2021. Since a period has elapsed, we are going to ask members of the Citizens Monetary Policy Committee of CNBC-TV18 how they would review the current framework. Joining me now to initiate this discussion is Sonal Verma, of Nomura, who is a member of CNBC-TV18's Citizens Monetary Policy Committee. Sonal, thank you very much for joining me. Well, first of all, do you think this inflation targeting framework itself needs review, or whether we should shift back to, multiple indicators?
I think it's definitely time to review more in the sense of what are the learnings from the last, let's say, 4 years of flexible inflation targeting. On average, inflation over the last 4 years has actually been about 4%. Macros in general have been stable. Expectations have broadly been anchored. And I think, indirectly the regime has put pressure also on the government to keep, its food, agriculture-related policies and fiscal deficit under control. So clearly there are things that have worked. But I think there are learnings in terms of, the nuances of the regime that do require a review, in my opinion.
Okay. Some would say, you've been, of course, very kind to the Monetary Policy Committee. Some would argue that we were also lucky in terms of the global crash in crude prices, as well as food prices in India, and terms of trade, as we are already seeing, could be turning against. You are giving a lot of credit to the Monetary Policy Committee and the framework, but regardless, would you say that the 4% plus minus 2% can stand?
Well, Lata, I think there are various aspects of the regime that need to be reviewed. Actually, first is what should the target, what should we target? Okay. Should it actually continue to be headline inflation? Or should we target a variant of core? My view is, given the volatility in food prices, I would be more in the camp of targeting a variable that, monetary policy can actually control through interest rates. So, I would think there is also a case to be made to actually target core. Second is, whether it should be 4 plus minus 2%. I think globally we are moving in an environment of lower inflation, so I don't see any point in inflation, India actually moving in the other direction and hiking its inflation target. So I think very much the target should remain 4. But if you're targeting a variant of core, then I don't think India needs to have a plus minus 2% kind of a band. Wow. A 1% variation should be actually okay. Third, and very importantly, Lata, I think, our communication with respect to the inflation target has been sort of 1 year ahead. We expect inflation to be, let's say, sub 4%. Yeah. I think these point estimates on inflation, don't carry much value. Ultimately, it's really the average over a longer period horizon that matters a lot more. And therefore, the communication around the inflation target has to evolve into more, let's say, a 12-month average of where we think inflation will be. Okay. So there are various nuances, I think, of the regime that need to be tweaked on this framework. Okay.
Well, actually, there are many people, and I would agree with some of them, that, even the headline CPI, many of them would say, is, too small a focus for the MPC. You're making it even narrower by saying core CPI. Inflation influences the external sector considerably, and there have been periods in the last 3.5 years when rupee appreciation has been a problem, and an inflation targeting MPC would have an appreciation bias. I'm not alleging anything, but don't you think that if the appreciation or if the external sector got out of line and became overvalued, that needs the MPC's consideration? Because it is directly influenced by an inflation targeting MPC. That's not even brought into the calculation. You don't see any of the MPC minutes even addressing a potential out of sync external sector.
Actually, Lata, I think there are much more important aspects that need to be brought into the ambit of monetary policy, and not just the external sector. Okay. We are, of course, in the flexible inflation targeting regime. It's not a blind inflation targeting. And we, the focus has been inflation, keeping, growth in mind. I think that needs to be widened out to include sort of the objective of keeping growth and financial stability considerations in mind. Now, you may say, external stability is one aspect of this. For countries like Indonesia that are very open and that actually get a lot of foreign bond inflows, it's important, Lata, but for India, and the experience over the last 4 years has been that what is going on in the internal banking and financial sector considerations are as important, if not more important.
Yeah, but let me interrupt you here, Sonal.
Other considerations.
Yeah, Sonal, but if you, I believe that, financial stability, as you point out, banking stability, NBFC stability is very important. But if you bring all that, then you're not a pure inflation targeting central bank. You go off into multiple factors, multiple indicators.
Right, Lata, and I don't think we should be a pure blind inflation targeting country either. I think that is the objective of flexible, what comes under the ambit of flexible. And, there can be periods where you do see, let's say, significant supply side shocks that lead to inflation picking up. But, what matters, therefore, is really not point estimates on inflation at a point in time, but whether the medium-term target is getting unanchored because of these short-term shocks. So, ultimately monetary policy is more an art than a science, and it is very hard to pin it down to a specific target, a specific number. It helps in communication. But I think ultimately when the judgment and the MPC is making a judgment on what an economy needs, it is clearly a broader set of parameters that go into making that decision.
But okay, so finally, what changes would you suggest then? If one, and I agree with you that we have to bring a lot of other factors like stability, internal and external, into the MPC's purview. But it would become very blurred, isn't it? At the moment, they're at least clear. They have one goal and one instrument. They have inflation to look at, and they have interest rates. Now, if you bring multiple factors, you have to bring multiple instruments as well. Therefore, just to wrap up, what should be the changes?
Yeah, Lata, I think, we should continue with flexible inflation targeting, but, in the definition of inflation, keeping in mind the objectives of growth, I think the mandate has to explicitly bring into account growth and financial stability. I would think that it is time to review whether it should be headline versus core, the band around 4%. And like I said, most importantly, moving away from point forecast on inflation to more sort of average inflation rates. And finally, Lata, I would say even on the Monetary Policy Committee itself, two things that we should be reviewing. One is the MPC itself should be a lot more diverse in terms of coming from different backgrounds, because clearly that will add more value. And second, I think in terms of the minutes, there can be more sort of forward guidance to provide more clarity to market participants in terms of what actually got discussed at the Monetary Policy Committee meeting. So some of those changes I think would be helpful. It is definitely time to review it, but I think I would look at it more in terms of what are the learnings and how can we improve on what we already have.
This is the most helpful conversation. Sonal Verma, thank you very much for joining me. I think Sonal summarized the key changes she wants very well. An average inflation for the full year and not a point target as well. Maybe more emphasis on core inflation. And thirdly, as she says, the backgrounds of the external MPC members could be a little more diverse. That's, maybe it's a contestable point. Can we have someone from the financial sector who would be having their own interests? So it's a rich topic of discussion, but that is very important contributions coming in from one of the members of the Citizens Monetary Policy Committee of CNBC-TV18. We're going into a break. We are coming with more of our members from the MPC.